All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first Industrial Roundtable of 2021. It's been a while since we've seen everybody, but we're glad you're here. So based on feedback from this group, we are going to keep this virtual, just to be mindful of everybody's time and not having to travel anywhere for a meeting. This will be a quarterly meeting this year, so keep an eye out for this. We also would love to have your feedback on topics that you would like us to cover. We heard from a lot of you that you like to hear from speakers and then have some general discussion amongst yourselves. So if there are topics that you would like us to cover over the next few Industrial Roundtable meetings, please post those in the chat and we will work on that. Also, if there's anyone else at your company that needs to be included in these, feel free to either send the invitation to them or give us their email address and we can put them on the list. Whatever works, we want to make sure that everybody at your company is included that needs to be. And other companies, if you know other of your colleagues that need to be on this, we would love to have them as well. So to start off, I'm going to introduce Chris Weaver from Lance Construction, who is chairing this committee for us this year. Chris is on the chamber board and has kindly offered to head up this committee this year. So Chris, thank you so much for that. And do you want to say a few words to start?
Well, thank you, Courtney. Appreciate it. This is an easy position since Courtney and Kim do a great job of managing all this, but want to welcome everybody this morning to our first meeting of 2021, and certainly would like to welcome and thank Chris Lloyd from McGuireWoods for presenting this morning. Appreciate his time, and in terms of a formal introduction, I'll turn that back to Courtney, but glad everybody could participate and look forward to a positive 2021 as we kind of work through on this industrial roundtable. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. So yes, I am not going to delay because I am super excited this morning. I reached out to our good friend Jay Langston at the Shenandoah Valley Partnership and asked if he had any recommendations for a speaker who could talk to us with General Assembly wrapping up a few weeks ago, what's going on in manufacturing, somebody that has been really diving in deep into what's going on legislative wise, COVID wise, all the things. And he immediately said, Chris Lloyd from McGuireWoods. So we were really excited to have him be able to join us. We appreciate his time. He is the Senior Vice President and Director of Infrastructure and Economic Development. And he has definitely got the experience and knowledge to help manufacturing, especially in our area, know what's going on. So I'm going to turn it over to him. I know he's got some things for us, and then feel free if you have questions while he's talking to put them in the chat, or we will open up for Q&A when he is finished. So take it away, Chris. Thank you for being here.
Great. Thanks, Courtney, and appreciate being here. Let me get this queued up. So again, Courtney and Chris, thanks for inviting me, and Kim for all you've done to pull this together. So really appreciate the chance to be with y'all. I'm actually going to start with before I get to the General Assembly activities, what I'm going to start with is I'm a vice chair, actually this year will be the chairman later this year of a group called the Site Selectors Guild, which is a group that advises companies as they're expanding and relocating facilities all across the country. So I was going to quickly run through and just take a few minutes to run through. We've been polling our members of kind of what they're seeing from their colleagues, many of whom are in manufacturing, or their client base, many of whom are in manufacturing, kind of what trends to expect to see unfold as we come out of the post-COVID world. So I thought that would be helpful first, just kind of give you a macro level view of some economic trends that I'm sure are of importance to everyone in the Valley. And then we'll focus on a few issues coming out of the General Assembly session. So again, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Quickly, as I noted, the Site Selectors Guild is a group of, it's about 50 of us. Actually, we just added our new members, so there's 57 of us now from around the world who represent companies doing their site selection activities. So I've been a member of that group now for 6 years, and we're actually 7 years, and look forward to continuing to serve in that capacity and really try to be a resource to economic development entities regarding what's going on with corporate America, or actually global corporate activities. But we polled our members. We've polled them 3 times since the pandemic began. Boy, it's amazing. It's been actually a year ago. I walked into the office. I'd just come back from spring break. As our son and I flew back from Salt Lake City, we were skiing on an eerily quiet flight. And so walked into the office a year ago today, and it's only been a few of us here since then. So hopefully world is returning back to normal. But you'll see that is that kind of that return to normalcy is what we're expecting within the guild. We had our most recent survey was done right before the Christmas holiday. And you'll see that we're expecting already, we're seeing and expecting a renewed activity in site selection. That particularly by that it was fairly slow at the middle and the beginning of last year, but by the holiday time, we were seeing that. I know we're seeing more activity from our clients than we've ever seen. And I've been at this for 23 years here at McGuireWoods Consulting. So site selection activity is strong. I'm sure y'all are seeing it. And that's not just new activity, but also investing in existing facilities. Obviously, hybrid is very much the new normal. And that means that a lot of these site selection tours are taking place in a hybrid or a virtual world. So for those of you, I see Greg's on the line, that you need to be thinking about your online presence and be ready for that. And for those of you who are trying to get investments in your facilities, don't be surprised if these visits happen virtually. People are cautiously optimistic regarding FDI, which is foreign direct investment. A number of the consultants are seeing that activity. People still want to invest in the U.S. We're still a relatively low-cost place to do business, particularly from an energy perspective. As some of the trade barriers or trade challenges of the past few years get resolved, people want to invest in the U.S. and they see the market here coming back, particularly much stronger than Europe. Workforce is still a big challenge. Yes, there is high unemployment right now compared to where we were a year ago today, but still talent is being sought after. And I'm sure many of you who have to run manufacturing plants are finding the challenges with regards to recruiting staff. And that is not just here in Virginia, that is nationally. And you're starting to see some creative approaches from states and localities for how to deal with that. But it is a big challenge. Another big challenge is what's going on with the supply chain. I think there was news this morning that Honda and a couple of the other auto manufacturers are shutting down production because they can't get semiconductor chips. There's a lot of tightness in the lumber market and in a number of key supplies that support manufacturing and other activities. Some of that's COVID, some of it is just poor planning. Some of it is capacity constraints because of international trade. Shipping right now, the charges for shipping are very high to move cargo from Asia to the United States. And I think I saw something recently that there are 38 ships backed up trying to get into the ports of LA Long Beach. You just can't even get the ships unloaded fast enough with all the product that's coming in. So that supply chain shakeup is taking place. Where we're seeing nationally a lot of activity, many of these shouldn't be surprises, biotech and life sciences, although I think there's that's a little bit overblown. We'll see how much real investment there is with onshoring or reshoring of those assets over time. Advanced manufacturing, very, very strong right now. Food and beverage has been strong and remains very, very strong. Everyone wants to be in the U.S. market for selling their product, and they also trust the U.S. market from a regulatory perspective. No worldwide customer is going to buy meat products or products from China, but they trust the U.S. regulatory system. They trust the U.S. The economies of scale that we have. So food and beverage is very strong. Obviously, transportation and logistics, and that includes e-commerce, is extremely strong. And the only reason we're able to support something like this in this virtual world is because of the growth of the software and IT market, and that includes data centers. So we're seeing activity across the country in all of these industries being very, very strong. And that strength is not just concentrated in the large urban markets. In fact, the large urban markets, meaning the New Yorks, the Chicagos, the San Franciscos, and the LA, are actually losing jobs. They're losing people. That's because of, to be blunt, very anti-business regulatory policies. Those economies shut down, and people are just like, they've had it. So they're moving to suburban areas. They're moving to more mid-sized metro areas. They're moving to rural areas. We've had several clients just within the past year that had been hanging on in California, and with the policies that California and other states enacted with regards to limits on their activities in post-COVID or when they came out of COVID, we had one of our clients, I will not name the client or the community, but is in Southern California, that the local board of supervisors passed a rule that said when they reopened that they had to bring back people based on seniority, not based on whether they were needed or not. And the company said, that's it, that's the last straw. We just can't handle it. And they closed their whole operation, 900 high-paying jobs in manufacturing, and said, we just cannot stand it anymore. And are moving, they moved part of it to the Midwest, and part of it, they're gonna move to Arizona and Texas. And so You're seeing the smaller metro areas, the suburban areas and rural areas being the big winner with this pandemic shift. From the metro areas, we asked our colleagues which ones they thought were winners. These are in no particular order, but the common thread, you'll see a lot of these, they're interior cities. They are cities within a 3 to 4 hour drive of another major metro area. Many of them are university or state capital towns. They're mostly communities of 1 million or so people, but you're seeing smaller communities in that 250,000 to 500,000 metro areas are also winning. So you think about, Harrisonburg, Stanton, Waynesboro, all the way up to Winchester and down into Roanoke. I mean, these are communities that are going to start winning and are going to start seeing more and more deals because people don't want to be in these high tax, high regulatory coastal communities. And for those people that can bring together the right assets of workforce, research and development, site availability, and a pro-business climate, they're going to be the ones that are winning going forward. This isn't going to be as relevant to many of you who are in the manufacturing side, but it does say what corporate site selectors are looking for and what they're saying that people should focus on. And everybody's always focused on the big white whale and the big win, but now is the time. So for those of you who are economic developers on the call, business retention is very important. So now's the time to be talking to your manufacturers. And for those of you who are manufacturing managers, this is the time to be talking to your economic development team and colleagues about how they can help you with workforce issues, how they can help you with supply chain issues and some of the challenges you face, infrastructure, tax, regulatory policies. This is a really good time for those discussions to be taking place. It doesn't mean business attraction isn't important. It doesn't mean marketing is not important, but paying attention to your existing business community is absolutely important and vital at this time. What do site selectors want to hear about? They want to hear about local conditions updates. What's the status of stay-at-home orders or reopening plans? They want to hear about new expansions. They even want to hear about closures and downsizings because real estate is so tight right now for industrial space that when a plant closes, someone's going to probably reoccupy it pretty quickly. Economic development incentives policies are changing radically and very fast around the country right now. So for those of you who are economic development professionals, you need to stay on top of that, and I'll talk about that momentarily. For those of you who are on the manufacturing side, this is why you want to be talking to your local economic development partners because those incentive policies are changing. I think you might find localities in the states be a much more willing partner than they've been in the past. Not that they've been a bad partner, I don't mean it that way, but the policies and procedures around incentives are changing. People want to know about new sites because real estate is tight. They want to hear about new success stories. This is a chance for a lot of people to hit the reset button on their economic development strategies and to adjust to a new world that's post-COVID. And again, talent regarding workforce data, unemployment data, and what new programs are being implemented are very, very important. How are communities preparing for the post-COVID world? Some of them I already talked about. They're strengthening relationships with their existing businesses. They're doing marketing. They're building relationships with other economic development stakeholders. That's utilities, that's power companies, that's railroads and others. They're reintroducing themselves to their state partners. They're doing research on skills and training resources, and they're updating incentive policies. So that's kind of a national perspective on what we see, what's going on with economic development. I have Q&A next, but what I'll do is I'll spend a few minutes here. Courtney, I think you said to talk about 20 minutes and then open it up for Q&A. So there are a number of issues that passed this General Assembly session, which are very, very important to manufacturers, some of which are bullets that were dodged this General Assembly session, some of which are just important to pay attention to, and others are issues that we're going to have to keep dealing with. The first one I'll talk about is tax conformity. Virginia, this is a fairly esoteric issue that is more important to those of you who for your CFO, but has a great deal of importance. Virginia, typically the way that we calculate income for Virginia income taxes, and this is corporate and personal, is we ride along with whatever the federal government says. But this year, we decided to deconform from a number of federal changes. Some of those were because the state honestly said they needed the money. And so by deconforming, that means you have a different way of calculating your income for federal purposes versus state purposes. Some of those ways that we deconformed are not good for manufacturers. There were a number of good provisions that were passed by the Jobs and Tax Cut package Congress passed in 2017, where Virginia is not fully conformed. And so Virginia has backed away from some of those provisions. We have embraced some other provisions, which are good for business, but make sure that your accounting team and your finance team is on top of that. For those of you who are small manufacturers who accepted a PPP loan in order to stay afloat and to keep payroll going during the pandemic, fortunately, the General Assembly did reject the governor's proposal. The governor wanted to fully tax those loans. The General Assembly, fortunately, did not go along with that, and instead is allowing for the first $100,000 of those loans to be exempt or to be deducted. And so that was for anything that happened during 2020. Where the manufacturing community now is going to have to stand strong is make sure for 2021, which will be taken up next General Assembly session, is that any future PPP loans, and of course companies are still getting them, and other grants and opportunities remain deductible. As you may know, the Virginia General Assembly has lurched leftward in the past few years, and unfortunately that's not been great for businesses. The first issue is last year the General Assembly, while they defeated legislation that would have rolled back right to work, they did allow for collective bargaining at the local government level. Now there was a delayed effective date of that of May 1st. But so that means starting May 1st, local school boards and local county governments can allow their employees to collectively bargain. I doubt you're going to see many localities in this valley do that, but you might see Harrisonburg as a city, possibly, or some of the more urban areas. You're certainly going to see discussions already happening in the Hampton Roads area, the Richmond area, and Northern Virginia particularly. A couple of weeks ago, the city of Alexandria got a presentation on what collective bargaining would mean for them. They estimated just the pay increase alone that the unions would demand would cost the city $25 million a year, would cost them $1 million in administrative costs, and would probably threaten their AAA bond rating. And that's Alexandria, a community that wants collective bargaining. So, the idea that, this is an area which the business community has to pay attention to. If teachers or others start to make noises about collective bargaining. And again, the school board for teachers is the one that is in control of that. So you could even have a community that is anti-unions or anti-collective bargaining for their regular employees, but the school board could allow for collective bargaining. And if we start getting a lot of traction with regards to collective bargaining to public employees, it's going to be very hard to continue the fight against maintaining the right to work statute in Virginia. So I raised that first. Second, again, this is an issue that's of more importance to your CFO, but it's something that for you to care about is Virginia. There is a push this year by Amazon and several of the IT companies to move Virginia to something called unitary filing. The manufacturing community generally resists that because if you did a unitary filing, it would essentially, for manufacturers particularly, would increase your taxes. Fortunately, the General Assembly for the second year in a row defeated that. But they did send it to a study committee. So there is a study committee which will be meeting during the course of the year to look at taxation issues generally, particularly individual income taxes, but unitary filing for corporations will be part of the discussion there. That is something the manufacturing community has to pay attention to. Because again, if unitary filing passes as was envisioned, that is a net tax increase for the manufacturing community. I know Brett Vassy and the Virginia Manufacturers Association are very focused on that. The study committee is just in the process now of appointing its members, but it is something to pay attention to. Third, there was legislation that passed in 2020, which moves up the importance of an issue called environmental justice. It created an interagency working group regarding environmental justice, and this is the concern that manufacturing facilities are often located next to minority communities, and that they have disproportionately adverse impact upon minority communities. There was legislation then that was introduced this year, which would have said before any manufacturer could get a permit renewal or a new permit for air emissions or water emissions, that not only would it have to go through the normal regulatory process, but as introduced, the legislation would have said that every person within a 5-mile radius of you would have to be notified in person or by mail of that you are filing a permit. And that you would have to hold public forums, and that those people would have the opportunity to weigh in to the permit process apart from the entire regulatory process. Those bills went down the wire. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. I'm not saying environmental justice isn't an issue in Virginia, but the idea that even a minor source permit would have to go through months and months of hearings and notifications, aside from the regulatory process, is a very large threat to the manufacturing community in Virginia. And so that is something I wouldn't be surprised if the governor is going to use his executive powers to still require some sort of review for permits, even though the legislation failed, but that is something to watch out for by manufacturers. The next issue I'll talk about is, y'all may know, the General Assembly has passed legislation which would legalize marijuana in Virginia. The delayed effective date is until 2024, although there's a great deal of pressure on the governor to seek amendments to that bill, which would make it legal immediately. I'm not weighing in one way or another whether that's right or wrong, but it does create a lot of issues for those of you in the manufacturing world. Because suddenly, if you have legalized marijuana in Virginia, what do you do with regards to drug testing? What do you do with regards to, employees who are operating sensitive equipment at your facility? How do you deal with that on the manufacturing floor? And a lot of those issues have not been sorted out or dealt with as part of the discussion of marijuana legalization in Virginia. Finally, the General Assembly also passed a big bill this year with regards to data privacy. And so for those of you on the manufacturer side, obviously your corporate folks are going to have to deal with this. It's not as bad as what California did, which gives a great deal of power to consumers with regards to the control of information that they give you as a corporation with regards to their buying activities or whatever. But Virginia does now have a new data privacy law that it does allow for some consumer opt-out, and it is something to pay attention to. We've got some interesting things that are right to work will be back next year. We have many of the candidates running for governor, particularly on the Democratic side, saying that they are committed to the full repeal of right to work. That is an issue that is not going to go away. We are just a few votes in the state Senate from repealing right to work. And that obviously is a big challenge for the Virginia manufacturing community and our competitiveness as a state, particularly when you see other states like Michigan or Wisconsin, which are embracing right to work. Here, Virginia may be going the opposite direction. So with that, Courtney, or Chris, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Chris. I guess I'll start with a question, and I guess this is in general terms, but a lot of the issues you talked about here in Virginia that are out there, some passed, some are going to come back. And just full disclosure, your firm, I think, represents the AGC of Virginia, of which I'm on the board and on its legislative committee. So I've been following a lot of those issues closely from the construction side, and a lot of the construction side and the manufacturing side are very closely aligned in terms of our sensitivity to a lot of those issues you mentioned. What from a competitive standpoint, for example, through your site selection guild, is Virginia starting to feel negative impacts from people even wanting to consider Virginia? I've heard rumors that economic development folks in other states nearby are, pointing the finger at Virginia and saying, don't even mess with them, look at X, Y, and Z, and come on. Usually it's down to us, right. Down being the South. It's reversed here in the Valley, by the way.
Yeah, those rumors are true. Because I get the solicitations. I'm hearing from the folks in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and saying, one, they're asking Chris, what's going on in Virginia, because they know I'm obviously wrapped up in things policy-wise and politically. But yeah, they are being used against us. How do I answer this? I think the perception for now of Virginia has gotten ahead of reality. Meaning that I think, Virginia has gotten a lot of press regarding what has happened over the past few years. And thankfully, we haven't lurched as far left as some people are portraying we have. The problem is like I said, as I was closing out, Chris, is we're just a few votes away from a full-throated embrace of a lot of stuff that you see coming out of California or New Jersey or Illinois. And it really requires, AGC, the Manufacturers Association, the Virginia Chamber, the regional and local chambers to be very, very vigilant. because it was only because those groups and some local industries really stood up that the environmental justice bills this year were defeated, that right to work did not stand. And it just requires us to be very vigilant, because the amount of money flowing into Virginia from hedge fund billionaires, from these unions, is incredible. If you look at the money that came into the 2019 elections in Virginia, which is the last legislative races we had, the top 10 donors into Virginia were labor unions from Pennsylvania. And I'm not talking tens of thousands, I'm talking millions of dollars that is flowing into candidate races in Virginia to push a lot of these very anti-business initiatives. And it really requires the business community to be aware of it, and not just wait until the General Assembly session to talk to your legislators, but now is the time to get them into your plant to help them understand, what challenges some of these rules and laws would have in just the day-to-day operations of a facility, then the day-to-day operations, Chris, you and the contractors face, and how this would put Virginia in an uncompetitive position.
If you, and I need to open this up, but it's an issue for me. If you mentioned that there's some states that are moving in the opposite direction of the direction Virginia is moving in. If you looked around the country and said, hey, OE business community of Virginia, chambers, manufacturing, contractors, the full boat, you ought to look at this state and replicate, do what they did. Because I asked that question because I think for the most part, the Virginia business community has had a very, very good deal going on for decades in a very business friendly state. And it's a different world now. So I guess what I'm looking for is, if you could point us to a state and say, hey, copy what they're doing from a business advocacy side.
Sure. There's a couple of notable examples. First one I put in no particular order. Arizona is the first one. What Governor Ducey has done out in Arizona, particularly for small businesses, they have realized that getting licensing people for professions, barbers, cosmetologists, electrical, not the skilled trades, but particularly for the service trades, they want to make it that some of those licensing requirements sometimes are a barrier to entry. And they work hard to make sure that the regulations upon particularly those professional services are not burdensome, and have really embraced a strategy around that, and then linking that up with financing. So that's more of an entrepreneurial bent. Notwithstanding the bad press that Texas has gotten recently regarding the storms, just what's going on in Texas with regards to how they've handled and have embraced business. I mean, that's where most of the companies from California are landing. And it's because Texas has gone out of its way, I still think in a very balanced way, to be pro-business while still protecting, doing environmental protections and other activities. The amount of infrastructure that they're building in Texas. I don't know if any of you have been to Houston or Dallas or San Antonio recently. I mean, it's just cranes everywhere with new roads and new infrastructure being built. They've been able to stay on top of it. They've just had a great deal of emphasis from the state regarding, being on top of those kind of issues. The other states, Utah, it's just generally, it's always Utah and Virginia kind of go back and forth about which one's good for business and which one's a well-run government. Utah is continuing that. Just a very well-run, very good state system that really is a partner with business. And then I would say Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. North Carolina has been on a tear for the past few years. Their corporate tax rate used to be higher than Virginia's. They've been lowering theirs by 1/4 to 0.5% every year, and the corporate income tax rate in North Carolina is now 2.5%. Georgia has just consistently been pro-business, and a good friend of business, and I think those are all states. Again, I'm not saying Virginia's not is doing everything wrong. There are a lot of things we do very well in Virginia, but again, some of the regulatory policies and some of these policies in Virginia, if they continue to take hold, as being advanced, are going to hurt our competitive position.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else got any questions?
Hey, Chris, with the outflux of people from California to Texas, what's your prediction on Texas eventually moving kind of swinging the other way.
That's a great question, Travis. And in fact, I meant to make that point with Chris's question. I was actually in San Antonio a couple of weeks ago, right before the storms, and I was with the head of the state economic development office, and I asked that exact question. I said, how do you make sure that they don't Californiaize Texas? This is Adriana Cruz, and she said, they've actually been very thoughtful in that, and that they essentially are pulling the business leaders aside. They've created a statewide advocacy group from these CEOs that are moving into the state and their teams and saying, you came to Texas for a very specific reason. And it was the kind of the mix that we have. Don't pollute, don't bring those ideas to our state. You need to continue to stand up. If that's what attracted you to Texas, don't let, those, sometimes those practices from your former home states really follow you.
Exactly.
So they're being very proactive about it from the governor down through their economic development apparatus. And again, I'm not saying Virginia doesn't have problems. There are issues in Virginia with regards to environmental justice. There are issues with regards to, worker issues and misclassification. I'm not saying Virginia's perfect, and that we don't have room for improvement. But I think that some of the policies that are being pushed now would take Virginia in the wrong direction. And I think, Texas has realized that. I think Arizona's realizing that. Utah's realizing that. Idaho, because they're all seeing this influx of people from California. And, Illinois is bleeding off into Missouri and Indiana. They're worried about it. New York's continuing to hemorrhage. So, they're going to come to Florida or Virginia or North Carolina. And I think just kind of having that thoughtful effort, and I'm sure Brett at the Manufacturers Association, Barry Duvall at the Chamber are starting to think about that, but we need to be very thoughtful and deliberate about it.
Chris, since you kind of deal with the whole state, can you explain, are the Richmonds and the Newport News and the Novas of the world paying attention to this? Are they getting as engaged and concerned as maybe some of us more rural conservative areas of the state with what's being pushed through those localities?
Yeah, I think there are people who are concerned about that. Obviously, all three of those areas, and particularly Northern Virginia, have trended, very Democratic or I'll just say progressive over the past few years. And some of the challenge you have in Northern Virginia is that a lot of the CEOs and leadership there, unlike what you had during the 80s, where a lot of those were homegrown businesses, you now have a number of CEOs who are not from that area, so they're not as vested in the community. Where you still do have that in Hampton Roads and Richmond. And I think people are paying attention to it. Probably it's not as much of a focus as it is for y'all, but there are people starting to wake up and realize, oh my goodness, the world is changing around us. And again, many of those CEOs and those corporate leaders were the ones that stepped forward during the most recent General Assembly session and were very good in explaining to the members what bad impacts these would have had they passed.
I feel like our local delegates understand our concerns and do represent us, but is it outside our realm to reach over to the Richmonds of the world and say, hey, look, you're going to impact the whole state with the decisions you're making? Is that? No,
it's not outside your realm. And I think that's where, we do all have to be talking in common about that, because again, I think your votes, the votes of the members in the Valley are necessary, but they're in the minority. And so you've got to, just being brutally honest, not only the minority party, but also you just don't have enough votes just by numbers. And so building alliances with other parts of the state is going to be absolutely critical.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions?
Again, Chris, all I'll say is I don't mean to sound all doom and gloom. There's a lot of great things happening, as we come out of the COVID crisis. Again, I think, Virginia, I give the governor some credit that, again, we did not clamp down. There was a lot of pressure on him to completely pull a Michigan or a New York or Pennsylvania style shutdown. And I do have to give him credit. You think about it, we never completely closed. Unlike, and I'm doing work in some of those states that I just mentioned right now, and it is just devastating. They're at, I just got something out of California yesterday. They're still at 10% statewide unemployment, 10%. Michigan's at 9%, and we thankfully did not encounter that. But we do need to there are, some clouds on the horizon that we all need to be thinking about and be cognizant of.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly that it could have been a lot worse in Virginia, and I'll commend the administration for not shutting it down the way it did. And we certainly felt that on the construction side, and I know the manufacturers felt it as well. So that was a blessing not to go down that road. There was a lot of laws in this session about, and I don't know honestly which ones passed, but a lot of pressure for adjustments to paid sick leave and vacation time and that sort of thing. And again, is that something, I'll ask that question, is that something that the manufacturing side is also attuned to and could have significant impacts on as that continues to get pushed? I mean, that's getting close to, different, basically, not only mandatory wage levels, but mandatory benefits.
Right. Yeah, you're right, Chris. There were a number of bills that would have required paid medical leave and paid sick leave. In the end, all of those bills failed with one exception. The paid sick leave did pass, but it was only it was limited to only paid sick leave for home healthcare aides, which the state pays for through the Medicaid system. Now, what remains to be seen is whether that was just what was necessary to get it out of the General Assembly, and whether the governor will seek to amend that. But that momentum continues to build. And again, I go back, just like the environmental justice bills, just like some of the other ones that I talked about, we are just 2 to 3 votes in the state Senate. Those bills all flew right out of the House, unamended. And it really was the business community and the manufacturing community and the construction community that stepped up in the Senate and was able to persuade a few members to block those. So again, you're right. Those are extreme mandates and costs upon the business community that, again, we do have to be paying attention to, because they're not going away.
Have you used the term, I liked it, lurching leftwards, I think is what you said. Have you ever seen a state in your experience lurch this far leftward in this short a period of time that Virginia has?
I was just on a call yesterday with someone, and they said, we were a generally conservative state, for centuries. And then we had kind of 1 year of a moderation, and then boom, we're California. And I can't think of anyone with that kind of precedent, to be honest. It has been an incredible, you've had states bounce back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Michigan will do that, or Wisconsin, but this has been a pretty abrupt change. I'm a firm believer in that, there's a pendulum and the pendulum will swing back. I also will say, I think the policies that are being enacted by the General Assembly are not reflective of where Virginia really is. I think, and I think they are much more left than the state really is. And I think there will be some swinging back. But it does require the business community to be very, very vigilant here.
Also going to be an interesting election year, and currently we have 47 people running for governor, so
You're exactly right.
Hey,
I'm from Maryland, and my previous career spent time in Maryland. I can tell you what, that pendulum never swings back. And I never thought, when I permanently moved here and joined Lance 13 years ago, I never thought Virginia was going to be more like Maryland than it's become. And it's
I always used to say there's more that separates Virginia and Maryland than the Potomac River, but I think that's becoming less so.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, what's your thoughts on $15 minimum wage for rural manufacturers?
I'll give it a little bit of background, Travis, so everybody knows. Of course, last year the General Assembly passed legislation moving Virginia to a minimum wage of $15 an hour by 2026. But they do require a process by we start increasing this year. We go to 970, 950, I think 950, 975 this year. And then we inch up until we get to 2024. And then that's when a study has to be done as to whether moving past, I think we're at 12 something by then, whether that would have a disproportionate impact upon rural parts of the state and others. I think a lot depends on who's elected governor in November. A lot depends on what the House and the Senate look like in 2024 as to whether that marches forward. And a lot depends on what happens at the federal level. Remember, we were only a few votes away in the U.S. Senate from getting $15 an hour minimum wage in this country. And that debate's not going away either. And so that could override anything that the state does. but we do have a few years to deal with this and to get on top of it and tell the story of what impacts it could have.
Okay. And one last thing, Jay and I, we were fortunate enough to talk to the politician here on Monday, and he said some of the stuff that was passed, like the electrification rules, electric vehicle stipulations that counties must have so many electric vehicles, or especially buses, by a certain time. And it's like, how's a town like Bristol or somebody gonna buy an electric bus at, $1 million a piece or whatever they are?
Welcome to California.
It's great.
It's
I'm going to West Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's the electric vehicle bill in Virginia essentially mandates that by 2025, the majority of vehicles sold in Virginia have to be electric. I'm going to cling to my 2005 Honda Accord with 326,000 miles on it until literally the wheels come flying off. So it's a very, very new world out there.
How would they even implement that? I mean, if you simply can't afford it, you can't afford it.
They are envisioning a subsidy scheme that they would, through our electric bills and others, that they would do cross subsidies. So Robin Hood.
Okay.
Any of our manufacturers want to chime in with anything that we've talked about today as far as like the post-COVID, now that we're kind of in that recovery, what's happening next, how things have changed in your businesses, anything, your pain points or things that you are seeing that you want some roundtable discussion on? Don't be shy. Everybody's cameras are off.
I'm not sure who else is on there for manufacturing, but I don't really have any further questions. Giving some good comments though.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I can represent for Flow Water as well and kind of echo that comment. Good information presented today. This is my first time on the call. I'll be joining more frequently moving forward, but I appreciate the feedback from you guys on everything that's going on right now. And I mean, it's definitely valuable information for us. So I'll be taking it away to the rest of our group and then ultimately probably coming back with comments for next time, but really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, and we are recording this. I'm going to send this out to you all in case you want to share it with anybody else. And I'll put a plug in here too. Like I said at the beginning, we were interested to have Chris on today, not just from the manufacturing side, but also because he is so closely following the General Assembly and things that are going on. We have our annual legislative wrap-up event on April 13th, which is where we have Senator Hanger and our 3 delegates who are going to give us a summary of what happened in General Assembly, and you can ask questions. We'll have an opportunity for you to send us questions ahead of time, and then also during the event. So Kim has posted that, thank you, in the chat. You can register for that. It's a free event. It will be held virtually. So that'd be a really good opportunity to hear directly from legislators about what happened, what they foresee coming up this year with it being an election year and different things going on. So definitely encourage you to attend that. It's always really beneficial event. So.
And Courtney, if I might, since you did mention Senator Hanger particularly, is everybody does owe him a great deal of thanks for something that is very esoteric but very important, was that there were new mandates coming down from the Secretary of Natural Resources regarding water quality in Virginia, regarding meeting our Chesapeake Bay standards, which are very important, don't get me wrong. But it would have been, the way that they were approaching it was very burdensome and very costly on industry. In the way that they were approaching it. And instead, Senator Hanger brokered a deal that allows for, I think, a very science-based and rational-based approach on dealing with reducing some of the nutrient loads coming from manufacturing, particularly in the James River watershed, but the rest of the watersheds into Virginia, the Shenandoah and the Chesapeake Bay. And so thank him for, it's an $800 million effort over the next few years, and really Senator Hanger just pulled that together. And again, I know that it sounds very weird, and I can't get my arms around it, but think about if the state's now going to participate in that. There's a prioritization process for dealing with it in a rational way. And if you had the regulators running the process, and I'm not attacking DEQ, that's not it. It was coming from the advocacy groups and others. What Senator Hanger and his colleagues did was very good for manufacturing, and it will still achieve some great environmental benefits. So use that opportunity to thank him for that if you could. Thanks.
All right. Anything else as we're wrapping up? Anything from our economic development folks that you want to chime in, Greg or Rebecca or Nick?
Not for me. Great. Chris, thanks very much for your time and great information as usual.
Happy to do it, Greg.
Awesome. Well, we will wrap up. I know everybody has a lot going on. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Hope you're all wearing your green. We are here in the office. But anyway, again, thank you so much, Chris Lloyd. We really, really appreciate that. That was great information. We will share out this recording to all of you. And you feel free to share it with anybody else at your company. And then please reach out. Other topics, other speakers that you want to hear about. This is your meeting. This is for our manufacturers to be able to share what's going on, things that you want, the chamber and economic development to be aware of. So please feel free to reach out to any of us for our future meetings. Thank you again to Chris Weaver for chairing this. Anything as we wrap up from you?
No, again, thank you, Chris, for your presentation. Great stuff. Appreciate it. And as alluded to, part of the industrial roundtable group, in my opinion, needs to be focused more on the industrial business side and help be one platform for kind of the advocacy. And advocacy sometimes starts with communication. Everybody's got to know what's going on. I know some of the businesses, Mark, certainly you at NIBCO, I know you guys are so busy dealing with business that it's hard to pay attention to what's going on at the state level. Sometimes throw in the local level, it's tough. So the chamber wants to be a resource for you to be aware of, help make you aware of what's going on, because trust me, I struggle with it as well. So, but thank you for everybody's participation and have a great day.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.